This one's going to be a bit interesting. So we're still getting set up down here, and we're still trying to get a good format for how we're going to do reviews, and we're still moving the collection into the bunker. But I thought I'd touch base on something that's actually been kind of bugging me. Is the topic of, are self-sealing valves a bad idea? I'm going to get into this for a little bit here before we kind of banter back and forth. But so some of you may already know the concept of a self-sealing valve is one where if you remove the canister, the mask automatically seals so that you cannot inhale. The theory behind this being that you can remove the canister and replace it without the risk of any CBRN agents ingressing into the facepiece and therefore you becoming a gas casualty. I think that this is a very flawed practice and a very, very imperfect idea for a number of reasons. And I think the marketing for the concept overall is gone about completely wrong. I think there are legitimate applications to it, but we'll get into those thoughts later. So right here on the table I have an Avon M50 and C50 mask. So obviously the M50 is, as you know, has the self-sealing valves, and the C50 just has a standard RD40 by 17 or NATO threaded canister. So other than that, these two masks are identical in their function and their appearance, basically. Just the canister mounting differences and nothing else. So there are only really two different types of self-sealing valves as far as gas mask designs, and the main two are the ones that you probably are more familiar with that started with the Italian Secure M90 mask, where there's effectively a spring-loaded damper that basically surrounds the inlet valve, where if you thread in the canister, it basically pushes on that spring-loaded plate and opens up the valve. So that way it relies on the pressure from the canister stem to open up the valve, as I said. And then you have the M50 here, which works quite similar to like those rubber popper toys that are basically like a half of a bouncy ball that's completely hollow. You flip it inside out, set it on the table, and then you let it sit and then it pops up. Same basic principle, only instead there's a little post inside the seal of the canister which pushes on a raised portion of the valve, which in turn pops it up and makes the edge of the rim of the valve stick up so that it allows air to pass in through the inlet valve. So those are the main two concepts.
GSR uses a similar thing, right?
I believe so. I don't actually know about the GSR. I haven't looked too much into how that system works. I'm sure someone will fill me in the comments. I haven't handled enough GSRs to really know about how that... I think it's... I'm pretty sure it's a similar...
I want to say it's roughly similar. I had one years ago. We have an FRR, which obviously isn't useful for that, but I believe it's the same basic concept.
Yeah, so... and when you're looking at... we're going to be focusing primarily on modern masks, because this is really a modern mask thing. You look at gas mask design today, and there's really only like 3 different companies, maybe 4, that are still producing their own designs. I mean, anything else that's still in service is like, older designs from like the 90s onward, and there really isn't a lot of innovation in terms of gas mask design as of late. Like the only real innovators at this point are Avon Protection. Obviously, they're kind of like the monopoly on gas masks at this point, because again, any other older designs that are still in service, like the Finish M95.
We're speaking in a military aspect here.
Yeah.
The industrial market's off to the side entirely.
And civilian, we're going to touch on civilian in a second, but military is the primary focus here. But so yeah, older designs like the Finish M95, what's it called? The Canadian C4. The Swiss M90, the Italian M90, or the MSF09, stuff like that, older masks that are still in service, those are basically relics of the 90s, and they haven't really, there's no real drive to innovate those. I'm sure that they've considered it, but there really isn't a whole lot you can do to gas mask design at this stage, short of making some sort of weird chemical that you can ingest that protects you from all known CBRN agents, which is a complete fantasy, but... yeah, we've really kind of hit a peak as far as innovating gas masks, so we're starting to run into little gimmicky sort of designs like the self-sealing valves. I'm going to get into why I think those are gimmicks here. So when you remove a canister, obviously you are exposing it and the facepiece to CB agents, obviously. So the whole idea behind self-sealing valves is the marketing would like you to suggest is that you can replace the canister without worrying about inhaling chemical agents. So let's look at it from this perspective. There is geometry on either of these surfaces where agents can theoretically collect. A negligible amount of agents, I'm sure, but there are going to be chemical agents trapped in these surfaces when you replace a canister in a hot, quote-unquote, CB environment that you cannot clear. An inlet valve only lets air in. When you exhale to clear the mask, it's either going to push it out the sides of the facepiece if you're doing the old style of covering the outlet valve, or it's going to use Bernoulli's principle of forcing all the ambient air in the facepiece out the outlet valve by just doing a sharp exhale. That's not going to clear the space in between the inlet valve and the canister stem, or the canister mount interface in this case. So what you effectively have is a situation of luck if you're using it as the marketing would want you to use it, where if you take the filter off the facepiece, put a new one on, that's a long way from your body to your face. You don't know what's contaminated, and you don't necessarily have the time to, break out the agent detector paper and decontaminate yourself. So it's really kind of a very, very flawed system in either situation. I mean, I cannot really think of a good situation, like maybe in an emergency, an absolute emergency, if you're in a rear area and maybe the contamination isn't as drastic. I cannot think of a single scenario where a self-sealing valve would be useful, except one, and that is with the M50 explicitly, because as you know, with this system, because it's a proprietary bayonet connection instead of like the LBM or the M90, where it has a standard 40 millimeter thread. This is a lot more complex of a system, and so it's actually, even me who's done it plenty of times, especially while wearing the mask, it's going to be difficult to align this properly and make sure that those canisters are fully seated. Now, I haven't tested it to make sure that there is resistance, like the valve does fully close when it's improperly seated, so if it doesn't, then it's completely fucking useless. But the whole concept here is that assuming that the self-sealing valve still does its job when the canisters are improperly seated, that would be the best case application of that type of component. But outside of that, I think it's just a complete waste of feature. Like it's just adding cost and complexity to the facepiece for no real legitimate benefit. I mean, can you honestly think of any situation where a self-sealing valve would benefit the user?
Yeah, actually, so if you were in a CB environment, let's say, for instance, you're on a ship and you go outside to check something and you have to come back in, you can change filters with limited decon, basically just clean around the area and still change filters. You still run into the same issue, but it's a little bit safer in a very controlled situation.
And I feel like that would be effectively an emergency type of scenario where you're basically limited on men, you don't have the resources to do a full decon, and you don't have the logistics to do a rear echelon rotation, because I'm sure Batso has discussed this in great detail, but the whole idea behind military doctrine of like CBRN protection is that you have a reserve unit in the rear that you would rotate out to hold that position, and you would effectively negate any need to change canisters in a CB environment. If your equipment is damaged to the point where you need to change CB canisters, you probably have bigger problems than needing to change all this equipment in the field. You're going to want to do that in a safe area. You want to have the logistics to be able to rotate men out of the hot environment and change canisters that way. This isn't Metro 2033, this isn't Stalker, you're not running around, in a woods or whatever, and you're not changing filters whenever your little meter at the bottom of the HUD runs down to filter life or whatever. It's not how this works. This is real life, and gas masks and chemical agents work differently than video games. This isn't just some gimmicky accessory that, extends the capability of the mask. It doesn't really add anything. It's just a selling point that's convinced a lot of governments and law enforcement agencies potentially that this is a good idea, but really, it really isn't. It's a good idea on paper, but in actual application, it just doesn't make any sense to me.
I guess my 2 cents on it is when you're looking at it from a doctrinal standpoint, considering everything else, it makes sense when you're in the system, when you can have the full rear echelon, which can rotate out, and you can do a lot of things. You can do larger movements, and you have the people, and you have the resources to really have control over the situation. Sure, this is fine. But when you get into selling this shit to civilians, that's where I have issues with it. Because, again, it's overkill. Plus, you're tied by the balls to Avon if you buy one of these, because you're stuck with Avon filters.
Yeah, I mean, that's like the worst part about the M50. I mean, the benefit to the M50 is that it's incredibly balanced. I mean, compare this to like the C50. I love the C50 to death, and I think it's probably one of the best masks that you can buy on the market. Yes, this is me being a shill. I know we're not sponsored by Avon, but in terms of just overall features, the C50 has flaws for sure, but as far as something that you can readily go out and buy for yourself as a civilian, I think that the C50 just has the best design as far as making a civilian gas mask. You have the variety of canisters that you can use with this mask. I'm sure Avon will say, oh, you need to use our conformal canisters for the best results. And yes, I'm sure to some degree that's true for balance purposes, but with the C50, you really have a lot of flexibility in terms of protection. For instance, this right here is just a surplus, industrial surplus, 3M 450-0211 CNCS, basically a riot control canister. The nice thing about the industrial surplus market is it's very cheap. It's not gimmicky. You're basically just buying whatever it is you're buying. You're not paying full MSRP. And the nice thing about particulate filters or stuff that's rated for riot control protection only is that, yes, it has an expiry date, but because it's particulate, it basically has an indefinite shelf life provided it isn't exposed to moisture or harsh climates. So that's really where the C50 or just any 40 millimeter standalone mask shines, is that you can put whatever the hell you damn well please on this thing without having to worry about, self-sealing valves or, the only sacrifice really is just the balance and potentially the breathing resistance, because the M50 offers a much lower breathing resistance, on paper, that is. It
is far superior to the M40 in many ways.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a lot easier to use the M40, and even these cheap filters are a lot easier to use the M40, and we're not degrading this mask at all for that.
I love the M50 for a lot of reasons. Like, looking at it from a military perspective, it's a lot like how I view the M17. Everyone likes to shit on the M17 because of how poor it's, how difficult, quote unquote, it was to replace its canisters. But that doesn't matter in a military context when, again, you're rotating men out, you're doing gear swap. None of that filter swapping bullshit matters because you're not in a hot zone doing it. Again, it's very conformal, and arguably the M17 is even lower profile than the M50.
I'd agree with that, yes. This is a compromise with the M17.
The M50, I would say that if assuming we were to make a brand new M17, like brand new production filters, brand new production M17s with higher quality, like, modern butyl rubber and modern manufacturing techniques, maybe upgrade the hardware a little bit.
It'd end up very close to this.
It would end up very close to this. And the only compromise would be that the M50 has a greater degree of protection because of its thicker filters, and then the M17 would just be more compact, lighter weight, and probably a lot easier to decon, and it would also be a lot more inherently leak-proof because the canisters aren't external. I think there's a lot that people take for granted when kind of, shitting on the integral cheek filter pouch design, because that really offered a hell of a lot. Like, you were never...
If half the damn Soviet Union liked it enough to adopt it, I think that means it's a pretty good design.
The only way for a cheek filter mask to leak is if the facepiece is punctured, it didn't fit you properly, the seal got broken through some mechanical means, and that's about it. There was no way you could remove that canister externally, and even if you remove the inlet valves, it's still going to go through the canister. That's the whole thing about it. But anyways, that's a completely different topic. So, where would the self-sealing valve make sense? I mean, I'm trying to think of it. I think you did mention industrials earlier, and you're probably going to resist this at first, but I think that self-sealing valves might actually make a little bit more sense in industrial applications, because that's not CB. I mean, if you put it on like a nuisance dust respirator, that makes a lot more sense.
No, it does. So here's, not to cut you off,
Yeah, go
but
ahead.
here's the thing. You have dual-use masks. We actually have one of them somewhere. I think it's in the storage unit, where you effectively have a variable resistance exhalation unit,
Yeah.
VREU, on an UltraView that has a YT, and one side of it's a filter, and the other side of it's supplied air. And the idea being, while you have supplied air coming in, it actually seals the inlet valve of the filter due to the pressure differential, and you're on supplied air. Obviously, when you cut the supplied air off, when you're moving from station to station, now you can use that inlet valve. That is technically a sealed inlet valve.
Yeah, and it makes if you ask me, I'm not. This is going to be a whole other thing, but like if you ask me personally, I think that makes a lot more sense in an industrial application like that, where those types of situations are going to be way more common than adopting the M53 or M54, where
Which is just, that's way too special. It's just like the Patriot. Really cool idea on paper. There's probably about 24 people in the entirety of the United States that would ever actually need a fucking Patriot at any point in time.
It's better to have a facepiece that you can attach whatever bullshit you want onto to...
like the UltraView.
Yeah, like the UltraView, perfect example, or the C50 in this case, although, again, you can't really make it PAPR compatible. You could, in theory.
We're working on it.
It'd be really easy to make an outlet valve that's spring-loaded to just swap out with the standard one, because it has like this voice cone on the inside. Just literally create some geometry to replace that voice cone deflector thing with a little cup that holds a spring and a damper that sits on the outlet valve.
Literally treat it like an FM12, basically.
Yeah, it's just... literally just make swappable components for your mask designs to make them more modular to different use cases, instead of like making an M53, M54, where it's one mask that tries to adapt to everything, but you have a bunch of permanently integral bullshit on the facepiece that's fragile, and you might not necessarily want to give that to an average grunt or a civilian. I know Avon has been pushing really hard to get civilians to buy more M54s and 53s, but this is what you need. This is... I mean, just not specifically in a C50, buy what you think suits your needs best or your budget, but this has the most rounded design as far as being able to accommodate it to different roles, and it's just so close to perfect, you know, given its few flaws like poor moisture drainage and whatnot, but that's beside the point. So, self-sealing valves. I think they do have a potential in some applications,
I mean,
but
they're basically quick not to cut you off. They're basically quick disconnects like you have on like any fucking supplied air system. Self-sealing valves exist in the world, and they're useful in a wide variety of applications. Do they fit on masks?
yeah, they could be useful for something. I genuinely don't think they have a purpose in the military, unless you've designed, like I said, you've designed it so where you have a system like this, and you've designed it to where if it's improperly seated, it doesn't seal effectively. Like you can attach the filter like this. It's not fully seated, but
I'm pretty sure that in that case, yeah,
it would work there. But we don't. I need to actually test and see if it'll do that. Maybe I'll make an update. But I think that's really all we can cover on the topic, unless you have any additional points. Or we run out of video time here, if we haven't already.
No, I mean, this still feels pretty short. I don't really have any other thoughts, especially. Again, it's a really great platform. But again, anytime they're trying to sell you a piece of military equipment, consider how the military uses it, and then if that applies to you.
And that's why the Airboss LBM basically became dead in the water, is because the whole gimmick behind the LBM is that it had self-sealing valves. And Avon was kind of scared for a moment, but then it kind of came out like, oh, the LBM has very, very poor internal dead space. It's way too wide on the inside. There's too many areas for CO2 to accumulate. And moreover, more people are discovering that the LBM had a very, very serious flaw with agent penetration. Certain types of chemical agents would penetrate the rubber, and they're basically useless. I mean, the entire Canadian Army recalled the C5. And they're getting, I don't know if they're replacing them or what Airboss is doing at this current point, but yeah, basically only a couple militaries adopted the C5 LBM, and Avon was like, oh, actually, we don't need to compete with this.
Yeah, like the Samoan.
Oh, God, don't. That's when I think that you're done referencing him, you bring him back into my life. So, that's really it. Self-sealing valves, they might have
They're
purpose.
a thing.
They're a thing. I don't think they have a purpose in any military application. I think they're a dumb concept, and people should stop focusing on them, because it doesn't matter. You Can't change your filters when there's gas in the air. Is it negligible? Sure, do you want to risk it? That's about it. If you have any comments, questions, corrections, or concerns, drop them in the comments below. God knows I'll hear from some of you guys. And we'll see you all later.
Yeah, I got the last one.